Welcome everyone to Women in the Military podcast. I'm really excited to have Angela here. We've known each other forever, but we've known each other via LinkedIn and different events, but we've never had a real long conversation. I'm like, we've known each other forever, but we don't really know each other at all. It's kind of a weird
Right.
relationship. But I'm really
That's true.
excited to have you on the show and to get to hear your story. I'm really excited to when I was doing the prep work, I was like, Air Force, I think. And I was like, yes, at least I knew that. And so I'm really excited because I don't know a lot of your story. I know a little bit, but I'm really excited to hear more. So welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we have a mutual friend too, Doug Wise. I think in the civil engineering world that yeah, kind
Yeah,
of
he was my boss at Right Pat when I was working at the headquarters. So yeah,
oh, that's awesome.
small world.
I was in the Azores with them on a tiny island in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, it is definitely a small world, and the Air Force really makes it a small world for sure. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. I definitely am a fan of yours, Amanda. Got your books; they're on my shelf. I've listened to the podcast, for quite some time now, and I'm glad to just be a part of it now, contribute.
Yeah. All right, well, let's start. Thank you for all the support, the way you've supported me with my books and just listening. I really appreciate it. So now we get to talk about you. So why
Ah.
did you decide to join the military?
Oh, so well, we'll go way, way back. I'm one of the seasoned ones. I actually in high school I became a teenage mother. So I've told this story publicly quite a bit because I've kind of uh, gone a really long way. I've got a 24-year-old now and a 4-year-old. So back when the 24-year-old was born, I was still just finishing up high school and really on food stamps. I was living off of a block of cheese, a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter a week. And then I'd kind of splurge on ramen noodles back when they were like 10 cents a packet and really just barely making it work part-time at Blockbuster. And we know what happened with with Blockbuster. So really told my brand new husband at the time, who was the high school sweetheart, I really want to give us a different life. I really want to check this military thing out. I don't come from a military family, and my knowledge of the military at the time came from like movies. It was all really from Hollywood. So it was definitely a leap of faith, but it just felt like the only option. I just had no money saved up, nothing. So that was really my primary reason for joining, is putting food on the table, and then really kind of maybe getting out of my little town in Indiana would be another reason. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so 24 years ago. So that was before September 11th, is that?
yeah, exactly. I joined up January of 2000. So yeah, I graduated in '99, uh, and yeah, went a few months later. Yeah.
And then you said that you told, was it your then husband
Hmm. Yeah.
that you wanted, and was he like, okay, go
Not at
for it?
all. Not at all. Actually, it is a funny story because I'm not the same person at all that I was then. I was much more submissive. So I was literally begging him to please let me join. It was just a very difficult relationship. Um, and he had like a GED equivalent and tried to join the army, and they were going to take a sign-on bonus, and it was this whole thing. So I was kind of like, let me do this for the family, and let me go in and let's see what this Air Force thing is about. So we actually went from the Army side over to the Air Force side and talked to that recruiter, and I was like, see, it's not that bad. And so I actually started kind of a campaign with his sisters as well to help influence him to let me join. So yeah, it was more of a kind of a begging campaign to make it happen. But Obviously, I won that battle.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you joined, you were already a mom. How old was your son when you went to boot camp?
10 months old, and I had never spent a night away from him. So I think sometimes I should have weaned myself into it because it was just brutal. I actually think that was more difficult than the actual boot camp itself. But yeah, it was, and in my sister flight, it was only myself and one other young mom, and we just kind of sobbed together, from time to time. Yeah, it was tremendously hard. I just every day thought he's gonna start walking and I'm never gonna know it, and all these different fears. But it actually kind of worked out. He ended up taking his first steps in tech school when I got to see him. So I was like, all right, well, got through one fear. So, but yeah, definitely hard time.
Yeah, I've done the past few interviews. It's always surprising to me, like how grown up some 18-year-olds have to be, and then like how young some like 22-year-olds are who haven't had to experience like the same sort of thing. And so it's really interesting to hear like how like that situation or that, yeah, that situation really impacts you. You know, you become a mom at such a young age, you have to grow up, or
Yeah.
other life situations, you have to grow up and you experience different things. And then sheltered people, I would say like me, live this like la la life, and you really have no idea what's going on in the world because you haven't had to grow up. You still can live in that bubble of security. And I
Mhm.
think the people who've had really hard challenges really are like, "Boot camp, who cares? It was easy." Like, I had my whole life was going on, and I was just trying to survive, and so I think that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think you're right. I could think of a lot of different situations where I felt like, uh, wow, I feel pretty old for my age, and having so many other peers my exact age. I thought, man, my stressor in life is feeding my child. That's a big stressor compared to some others. So it did definitely kind of feel a little separate in that regard, like unrelatable maybe. And then really having a difficult upbringing as well, leading into that kind of helped mature me into what would be a heavy responsibility as well. So um, I think, yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, boot camp ended up being I mean, so good. I actually tried to. I used to always say like I'm a walking recruiter, because it was so life changing and transformative, and it was like exactly what I needed in that moment. It's like even though the reason I came in was, for this, feeding the family and being responsible and giving us a different life, it ended up becoming so much more for me as a human. I was struggling with self-esteem issues and really my own value. I mean, I just shared I was begging my husband, which is something I would never do at this stage of my life. But truly, it was like I say that boot camp was kind of like really kind of this process of stripping me down and rebuilding me back up to, I wouldn't say like a bionic woman, but it certainly built me up into a stronger, more confident person that really, when I got out, my husband was kind of like, who the heck are you? It just kind of, wow, really equipped me for facing not only the military, but facing life in a better way. So I'm like, best decision.
I really like hearing that, and I think that's one of the, like, challenges is when we leave the military is, like, how much the military changes. You said, like, in that, 6-week time frame, even your spouse was like, "Who are you? What
Yeah.
happened to the girl that I was married to?" And
Yeah.
now there's this strong, confident woman who knows what she wants. And I think when we leave, there needs to be, like, a boot camp to get out of the
Yes.
military to help us, like, because that's they do. They, like, build you up or they tear you down, and then they build you back up who they need you to be in the military. And sometimes that's a really hard transition when you leave the military. and you're doing it with a 1 week tap class, which is
Yeah.
not anything like boot camp. And so it doesn't really prepare you in the same way that you got prepared to go into the military. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're kindred spirits. Literally, I was defending my dissertation, which was all about women veterans transitioning to the civilian world, and I was saying, as I was talking about our identity and how they bring us into this military identity really well, but they don't let us out so well. And so it's just kind of like a rip the band-aid type situation. And I said, we need a reverse boot camp. We need
Yeah.
the same thing, but on the other side. I have goosebumps actually. That is I, I'm actually astonished that we don't have something like that at this point in the military. But I feel like enough people are catching on to the fact that there's so much added pressure and anxiety and stress and depression and homelessness, and all of those things are really coming to light more and more, that it seems inevitable that we should have more structure on the other side of this. Somebody's got to fund
Nice.
it, but
You're very optimistic. I'm kind of like the military's like, "They're not my problem anymore,"
boom,
and, like
yeah,
yeah,
you're
and
out of
they're like,
here.
they'll
Yeah,
f and I think that's why there's so many, like, veteran organizations that are focused on transition because veterans see, like, what their experience was like, and so, yeah, I think that is something that needs to be done, but, yeah, it's a funding issue and also, you know, people in the military are making the decisions and they don't understand what it's like to transition until they're on the other side and then they can't
yes,
make those decisions. So it's kind of like we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we have that challenge. Because sometimes I feel like the military gets in groupthink and they don't have all the pieces that they need. It's like, oh, we'll put all these people in the room and we'll discuss it. And it's like none of you have transitioned.
right,
None of
right,
you are leaving the military. You don't understand why people are military because you stayed in. You need to talk to the people who are actually leaving, before the 20-year mark and find out why they're leaving. So, anyways,
yeah,
let's not get distracted because we'll have to do another podcast interview about transition.
awesome. Yeah, I'm down for that. That's definitely a favorite topic for sure.
So let's get back to your story as I got on my little soapbox. And so you were at tech school, you were back with your family and going through, tech school's still pretty challenging. It's not as, time consuming, but it's still a lot of work. How was that adjustment to like working, having your family there and finding that balance?
Yeah, it ended up being a much longer tech school down in Keesler, Biloxi, Mississippi, than it was supposed to be. It was just a really long delay to start my class, so I got kind of all those extra duties, CQ, and all of that. Um, you know, I will be honest and say it was tremendously difficult. I was really still adjusting to. Uh, in some ways, I think boot camp was even a little easier for me. And then tech school, my husband and baby actually had to, stay outside the gate, and I had to stay on the gate, and we were really limited for certain phases that you just had to kind of wait out time. And I remember that, on my son's first birthday, I got 1 hour to spend with him after school, and he had to come on base, and so we spent it in the dining facility. And I was starting to give him a piece of chocolate cake, and, a few full bird colonels came over and just dressed me down in front of everyone, that I was giving away government, you know, assets to, my child, and I was like, Wow," and it was just the most heinous thing, and I don't even know if I was able to muster up the fact that it was his first birthday. I'm just happy to be with him on his first birthday, but until this situation, and then I was just horrified, and I thought, I I I mean, trying to keep my military bearing together, and I I felt like, wow, I'm not sure that the military is really for me, because to me, the mom role is much it's the most important role there is. And so I really sat with it for a while, and I was like, I don't know that I'm aligned with this. And I talked to, which, took a lot of courage as well. I talked to my instructor for that kind of ran our little flight there, and he kind of took his role aside, really talked to me human to human, which was, not something you experience after boot camp and then into this. And he said, let me just be real with you. This is not the real world. This is the training world, and this is very different than what you're going to experience when you finally get out of here. And he said, I mean, he was pleading with me. I'll never forget who he looked like. Jesse Ventura, the wrestler, and his name was Sergeant Green. And he had that much of an impact that I know exactly who he is 24 years later, because he said, I had to hang in there in this training part. I thought the same way, like, the military isn't family oriented and we're not aligned. And I think I made a mistake. And he said, but I would have regretted it for the rest of my life because it did all these different things for his family. And he really went into some personal stories. I have goosebumps again. And it was just one of these moments that is life changing, that I was ready to bounce. And I just am so thankful. I've thought about that so many times over the years, that he talked me into staying and just kind of took his uniform off for a second and said, hey, hold on, you really don't know the real military yet. You've just seen this kind of, testing you
Right.
part. Right. So yeah, thank goodness. But that was tech school for me. It was kind of like after he talked me down and kind of said, just sit tight, you're almost there. I really kind of was able to buckle back in and just get back into the studies and just kind of, all right. My husband, he was a little, he was part of that situation. So he was slower to warm, after that. But I was definitely like, all right, I'm back in. I'll put my chips back in. Uh, so yeah, I got through it, pretty
And to
well
think
after that.
of, like, what those colonels did, and, like, they probably never thought about that experience ever again, or maybe they did with some regret, but, like, how they could have lost an airman, like, who
Yeah.
was serving, and how that, like, I think so many times, like, people do stuff and they get, like, they say something or they're not nice to people, and they don't even think about, like, how much it affects that one person's life, and, like,
Mhm.
how it could have changed, like, everything for you guys. And that just, yeah, I'm so glad that you were able to get that real, like, support that you needed, especially after having such a bad experience with people who are kind of just, like, doing the military thing at tech school
Mhm.
and not thinking about, "This is a real person with a
Yeah.
baby," you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah. I met so many colonels throughout my career, and then now even in my career now, and I just thought, I can't fathom that in the real military, like 3 colonels just walking over to a young, airman. Like, it just didn't fit with the real military. So I'm really glad that he talked me off that ledge, because I've never experienced, um, a situation where I could have seen that replicated. So yeah.
yeah. Wow, so powerful. Well, I'm glad that you were able to get the support you needed and get through tech school, and so then you got to start your career. So, what was your job, and where were you stationed at?
Okay. Yeah. So I actually went in open admin. So a lot of people don't realize that when you get in the military, you can try to either get a guaranteed job or at least a guaranteed section. So I went open admin, which means basically they could show me the administrative jobs that were available in basic training. So I chose. You get like a small paragraph to figure out what your job is going to be, and I don't want to be postal, and I don't want to just do straight office admin, so I'll do this other thing that I really don't and didn't I had no clue, but sounded different. And it was called Operations Resource Management. So one Charlie Oscars, we were called. And it turned out that we were one of the few enlisted that were really with the air crew members wherever they were, which really ended up down the road being a very highly deployable job. So as an enlisted person, I was really surrounded with officers and air crew members, which I really think helped me for the whole rest of my military career, and then the IO psychology career, and beyond, because I mean, they're humans, and these were the people that I interacted with every day, all day. There were much less enlisted folks in that field, and really a lot of officers. Really put me on the operations side of the mission, which was really exciting, fast paced. And as a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old, one of my roles was to tell a pilot, no, you can't fly because you haven't done your training qualifications. Who would even think that that's legal to say? And that's your literal job, is to say, sorry, you can't fly today. It's try telling a fighter pilot that, and they're not real happy. So you had to really have a backbone pretty quick, and really know your regulations, because you had to stand behind what you were saying. You had to prove it in many cases, because you're telling people something that they don't necessarily want to hear. But then on the other side of that role was really, helping people stay proficient, and um, helping these aviators, get qualified, and get all of their check marks, so that they can be ready whenever the mission calls, which it certainly called many times during my time in.
Yeah. That sounds I love that you're like, "I just read this little paragraph." I was like, "Nope, nope. I don't know what this means, but that sounds good."
Let's go with it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It paid
I
off. I
think
really did like the career field a whole lot. I mean, all of the deployments away from a toddler and a young child were incredibly difficult. But wow, I'm somebody who thrives on action, and gets bored easily. And so this ended up being the perfect career field for me. Thankfully, something in that little paragraph caught my eye, because
yeah.
I definitely don't regret it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we mentioned that you joined in January of 2000, and so then September 2001, you've been, like, doing your job for a while, and then the military changed pretty much overnight. So what was that experience like?
I actually, I have a blog called GoLoveYourself.live, and I do a September 11th video. I pretty much cry through the whole video, but because it really was a difficult time for me personally, and the world. But I had just gone on my first real deployment to Saudi Arabia just the summer before. So we know September, just the start of fall. So I had been home for 2 weeks. I was still on my, rest and recovery um, from the first deployment, and really kind of just reintegrating with my 2-year-old and my husband, and then boom, I'm at Fairchild Air Force Base, Spokane, on the West Coast, and my family is near Chicago. They're on the Indiana side, and I get a call from my mom to watch the TV, and I see this, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm watching it with the rest of the world, and within days, I got tapped on the shoulder to go to an undisclosed location. Um, Much like a huge amount of our military folks did. And I mean, that's incredibly difficult on the mom and wife side. But I could say that was probably the best compartmentalization I've probably ever done in my life, because it was like there's no greater mission at that time. It was like, let's do this. I was literally having dreams of, Osama bin Laden, and just really um getting completing the mission, we'll say. I won't go into too much detail, but I was pretty amped up, and excited to be a part of it, but also really hurting inside. So, I haven't always been that great at compartmentalizing, personal life and professional life, but certainly in that moment. And then just to speak to the really how the rest of the military trajectory changed after that, as I deployed many times after that. We know that there were lots of missions, and it kind of moved around the Middle East quite a bit for several years after that. So, I definitely buckled up uh, to stay away quite a bit. Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Noble Eagle, yeah, um, yeah. So lots of goodbyes to the little one. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I actually tell a story. That deployment right after September 11th, I had a very, very before the word toxic leadership was a thing. Truly, my supervisor was horrific, absolutely horrific. And while we were at that deployment, and I wrote an anthology called Sisters in Arms with 8 other women veterans, and we just released it this year. And I tell it in my blog, the story of her toxicity and how a leader can really impact one human. um, but then I also talk about the supervisor that came in after her, and fantastic leader, and much more of what I know now to be a real leader. But that is actually where my career field now was born from, that moment of being in the middle of, the fallout of September 11th, out at this deployed location, missing the heck out of my family and hurting inside, and having to deal with this terrible leader, and then seeing fantastic examples of leadership after that made me really really understand how important leaders are. So that's actually why I'm a work psychologist to this day, why I became a coach and an executive coach and got into really working on organizations and businesses, because it was like, wow, one human really does make a huge difference in a person's life. And starting with such an extreme, dramatic experience with this particular leader. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So much. I think one of the things that I really liked about your story is like you were already I think sometimes people even within the military community think like, "Oh, well, before September 11th, nobody deployed. Everyone was home, everyone was happy, and like now we're not at war like today, and so nobody's deploying, everyone's at home." And that's not true in the least. And I think people forget about that and they don't realize like the challenges that the military members and their families are facing, like, right,
Mhm,
even today, I've as being a still being a military spouse, I've seen a lot of, like, different things from different people within the community about how challenging it is to be in the military or be part of the military community as a spouse or a family member because of everything that's going on in the world and then like with the budget,
mhm, mhm,
and all those things are just like added to it. And so I think people think, oh, it was so nice and like it was less ops tempo, but it was still there was still deployments, there were still things going on, and I don't think people talk about it enough. And then to just get home and then to get tapped to go right away, and that was the mission and that was required, but so hard to have to go through that. And
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was, my 24-year-old is now working out here in Germany where I'm stationed, as a civilian, and he and I talk about it still every once in a while that, you know, every mom who is listening to this, and parent that listens to this remembers, having to tell their child, uh, you know, mommy or daddy's going away, and that doesn't mean I don't love you, and I don't know when I might be back, but I am coming back, and really not knowing if you are, and all of those hard, it's like we never forget the difficulty, I feel like, of that moment, of having to say goodbye. And then when they start to grow up and they kind of really know you're not just going to the grocery store, gets even harder, I think, in some ways. But yeah, that is definitely kind of oof, the
Yeah.
toughest part of the job, you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, but you joined the military to provide for your family and you were able to do that. Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I still think, I best decision ever. He's gotten he meaning my my oldest, the one who really got the brunt of the military experience, has gotten to see the world, experience things that he never would have, and he has said, I checked in with him multiple times throughout his life, to see how he felt about that decision and really say, like, would you have rather we stayed in Indiana and just kind of try to, grunt through it and make it work? And he has always consistently said, no, I'm very glad that you went for it, which is validating for a mom to hear, that's like, okay, all right, we took that leap of faith with that big risk, and made a lot of sacrifices throughout, but really coming out of it without any regrets, even with the toxic situations and the situations in tech school and all those different things. It's just like, if you know that you're buckling up for a ride, but you're focused on the bigger picture, my goodness, there's so much to get out of it. The benefits have been just unbelievable.
Yeah. And I know we didn't get like very far in your career, but I want to kind of see if there was like any highlight from your time in the military because there's a lot more to cover. I'm like, you're now a doctor, like you have your PhD. So like how do you go from airman to PhD? Like there's got to be a crazy story in there, but I want to like cover some of the highlights of your career and then like talk about transition and what you're doing today.
Sure, yeah. So, really, you kind of heard where that career was born. Was really that really difficult. It was year two actually of my military career, having that experience, and then I was unfortunately med boarded out. So I had about 6 weeks notice before I had to transition, and I had just gotten my bachelor's in social psych. So thank goodness, because I wasn't planning on being uh, medically discharged. So I thought, all right, well, let me see what I can do with this. And I ended up turning that career field I described into a training role, because I was really responsible for a lot of training elements, but then I had an additional duty as an education liaison and doing other kind of instructor type duties. So I took this additional duty, kind of packaged it up with my career field, and really became a decent resume for myself. And I became a corporate trainer right out of the military, and that was like, okay, great. I'm training salesmen. I've never really sold, but I'm in this training role, and what found was that the kind of franchise owners, these people that managed the folks I was training, were really seeking my advice more and more and more about their candidates and should they hire them. And it was really starting to take on this different form to where they were seeking me for more coaching type advice. And I thought, you know what, I'm really enjoying that more than the training itself. And then I blossomed into starting my own business in coaching, and then leadership coaching and leadership development. Um, and then I started learning about this career field called organizational development, where you do a lot of coaching, you do a lot of working with teams and helping them get healthy and helping the organization get healthy. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this to me is another act of service. This feels kind of like military service, because it's helping these civilian organizations feel better when they come into work, have a healthier environment, and this and that. So I was like, I really love this career field. So my master's ended up in general psychology, and then I found a job with Army Medicine working for the Surgeon General, which ended up being the most exciting role on the planet. So I got to really learn this OD field, this organizational development field, and we were building a culture of trust within all of Army Medicine. That's 75,000 employees around the world. So I got to travel everywhere to all these different military hospitals and clinics and focus on their culture and help them trust one another more. And I mean, how rewarding. So it was really, really, really cool, exciting situation. And that mission kind of closed up, and I ended up moving into, I was a military spouse at the time, and we go where our husband's orders go sometimes, right? You know this well. So I had to move away from that role, and decided to get into the civilian world again, but still in this organizational development field. So then I got to kind of do that in the civilian world. I did that for 8 years. Did enjoy it, but for me, something was missing. I was growing my own business and doing really well at that, and the business is doing great, and it's still doing great. But I always wanted to keep my foot in the military community, and when I really didn't become a military spouse anymore. So my ex and I split up. Then I was just the civilian. And so then I had to kind of do the real transition, I feel like. And that was like, wow, okay. I ended up starting a veterans group at the organization I was at and trying to rally veterans together to, really start this community. Um, and I think it did it felt connecting for a while. Um, and then um, and then I ended up moving with my husband now. We moved to a completely civilian place, and I had no military tie at all, which just didn't work for me. So by this time I'm doing my PhD, and I'm digging in the PhDs in organizational psychology, and I have this opportunity to learn more about veterans, and I find out that just how much women veterans are struggling, in particular with transition. And so I'm like, okay, now I'm really plugged into the community again, much more virtually now because I'm not really near any bases and I don't have that tie into the community more, but I am now interviewing women veterans, and I'm getting to really experience their transition process and put together themes and dive in that regard. And that was incredibly rewarding and still is. I'm still you know into the transition research and talking with women veterans specifically. But then I got a call that a position in Germany was opening up to go back into Army medicine. And I thought, oh my goodness. Okay, well, had a conversation with the husband and said, how do you feel about moving from Georgia to Germany? and uh, and to my surprise and delight, he was like, let's do it. Let's go. You've been missing this community so much, and it really does complete me. So we still have the business, and we've carried that on, but yeah, now I work for Department of Defense out here in Germany, as an organizational psychologist. So incredibly rewarding because my main client is the commander. We're able to make a difference every day. We're focused on culture and helping the culture thrive. Where there's conflict, we're helping to resolve that. We're trying to get in front of investigations and prevent the messy part of doing the mission. So I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I feel like I'm living the dream. As a civilian, it's like I feel like I'm right there in the action again. And the biggest thing that drives me intrinsically is making an impact, and I just can't see any place right now on my path where I can do that more. So that's pretty cool. And then to be able to kind of still have my 24-year-old out here, and then my 4-year-old, and then my husband's loving it as well. So yeah, that's our current state. That's how things have been going.
I love hearing your story of, like, how it ended all abruptly, and then you were able to, like, repackage what you were doing in civilian terms, which so many veterans have a hard time with, and were
Yeah.
able to find a career, and then just hearing, like, how this happened, and then this happened, and, like, following what the different experiences were. So, I think it's really you weren't planning to leave the military, but then the med board happened and, like, you were prepared. You had been working on your degree, and so you were ready, and then, you made that switch. Even though it was unexpected and wasn't part of the plan, you were
Mhm.
able to, quickly adjust, and probably, like, "I need to provide for my family" was, like, a huge driving factor of, like, "I gotta figure out how to make this work. We only have 6 weeks to figure it out," and so a lot of pressure on you to figure out like what the next steps were and like an unexpected situation.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely learned the value of making your resume speak to the job that you want. I've found a lot in my conversations that you probably have in many of yours that uh, people when they're transitioning think that, I'm desperate. I got to grab the first job that comes my way, and it's it's usually something that they settle in, but they, the resume package, it's kind of, we really undersell our skills so much. And I say every chance I get that most military people have more responsibility than executives in the corporate world by the time we're 23 or so. And how do we really tell our story? And I was fortunate that I had just had enough additional duties and enough things to kind of piece together, like, I think I want to try this training gig, piece together a good enough resume, so that it did work out. But yeah, um, you're right. So many struggle with that piece. And then my dissertation research focused on successful employment, but it also really focused on our um, our identities while we're in the military, and then our identities during transition, and then the identity we end up with, which is really where the struggle's at, in our civilian veteran world, because a lot of folks end up with these dual identities where they still have this military identity and they have the civilian one, and that doesn't always help us thrive as veterans. It can be pretty detrimental. So I actually identified it as one of the main issues that can lead to depression and some of those things I talked about earlier. So um, yeah.
Yeah. That really resonates with my story. I was talking to someone, I was like, "Well, there's, like, me as, like, a military spouse, and then there's me as a service member, and they're, like, 2," and she's like, "Aren't they one person?" And I was like, "Yes, they are one person," and, like, that was kind of like a turning point, but it's, like, funny that we had a conversation about that, and she was like, "You're one person. You're not 2 people living one person's like, you don't
Yeah.
have to, like, try and fit 2 different things," and I was really struggling with, like, how do I meld those together, and through that conversation, she was really able to help me realize, like, I'm one person, which I
Yeah.
think it goes exactly into your identity of, like, we have these 2 identities, and we think that we have to, like, act like different people when we're and it's like, "No, you're one person."
Right.
And if you can figure out how to live with both of those, then you can figure out a way forward, but, I mean,
Yeah.
that really resonates with my story.
For sure. I definitely I talk about transition any chance I get. Now that I'm back in the military community again, anytime someone says, "Oh, I dropped my retirement orders," or "I'm getting out," I'm that first person that's like, "We need to talk. Okay, let's talk about it because I want to share the research, I want to share the findings, and help people, get in front of those and avoid the landmines." Because it's definitely there are recipes that work out there, um, for sure. Even if you get 6 weeks notice, I guess.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Well, this has been such a great interview, and I've been playing with the idea of doing a summer series on transition, and I really think I need to do that. So, I'm really excited for a future possible conversation, but I'm glad we finally got to hear your story in the military and a little bit about the work you're doing today. And I'll link to your book and your blog in the show notes so that people can find them easily. But before we
Awesome.
end the interview, I'm gonna ask, what advice would you give to a young woman considering military service?
Absolutely. That is fantastic. I think that, if you're considering joining the military, please do not let fear be what keeps you from that decision. Sometimes, uh when you feel fear the most, it's when you should move forward. It's actually that strong sign that maybe this is right. I think that we sometimes fear success. We always talk about, fear of failure, but we also fear success sometimes as well. And just um, know that, it is different from what currently where you're at. But wow, what a game changer, and what a life. And then the other piece of advice I would say is really think about what calls to you. What are the things that you enjoy, that you're passionate about, and really trying to find alignment in your career field in that. Some people do feel like, they need to hop in and, take a security forces job or take an infantry job or take the first job available. And I would say, hang tight and really press those recruiters. They want their numbers, they have a job to do as well. But really press those recruiters for, when the job you actually want is available. And if you can hold out, even if it's a 9-month wait or whatever it is for that career field, it will make a huge difference, I feel. Getting into the role that speaks to your heart, then it won't feel like such a square peg round hole situation. So those would be the two pieces I would say.
It's kinda like your transition advice. Don't take, like, the first job that you get offered when you leave the military, make sure it's the right job. The same thing when you're going in. Don't take the first job or the job that has the biggest bonus just because it has a bonus. You need to find what the right thing for you is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, the biggest step is figuring out, what do I actually like? What do I actually really, enjoy? So take that time. It's an investment. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I really had a fun time talking to you, and I'm glad we got to do this interview, so thank you.
You too, Amanda. Thank you. Take care.